Hey people, it's Siobhan O'Sullivan here, just dropping in briefly at the start of this episode. I've got a couple of different things I want to say and share with you before we get to the episode proper. First of all, I'd like to say a very, very big thank you to Josh Milbourne, who's stepped in and has been hosting Knowing Animals for the past few weeks. Indeed, it might be stretching into months by now. I'm so indebted to Josh for his contribution to the podcast and for stepping in and helping me out and helping you out at this very difficult time. I hope you agree with me that Josh has been doing an absolutely outstanding job bringing voices that otherwise we wouldn't have heard from. He's been interviewing people that I myself wasn't familiar with their work. So I see Josh's contribution to the podcast as being extremely positive. And into the future, Josh is going to continue to host the podcast very, very regularly. Although he and I are hatching a little bit of a plan for me to occasionally drop in and host a couple of episodes now and then. So if you've been missing me terribly, please be heartened to hear that I might be bringing you the odd episode of Knowing Animals in the future. But the reason why I'm here this episode and why Josh and I agreed that it was particularly important for me to do this introduction is that this episode we're remembering Helen Marston, and she is somebody that I knew. She was a friend of mine and a animal advocacy colleague of mine. So we both agreed that it was very important that I say a few words about Helen's life at the start of this episode. So we're remembering Helen Marston this episode. She sadly passed away a few days ago. She died of cancer. She's had breast cancer and she lived with the disease and battled the disease for about a decade, and she passed a few days ago. Helen has been a very important inspiration to me, both professionally and also personally. Helen was involved in animal protection advocacy for as long as I can remember. From the very first time I knew anything about what was happening in animal advocacy in Australia, Helen was there. She was at the front line. She was working hard from the animals. And one of the things about Helen that really, really stuck out for me and really impressed me and inspired me was that she remained true to her passion of trying to make the world a better place for animals, even when she was sick with cancer and even when she was terminal and knew she was going to die. The episode you're going to hear now after this introduction was recorded a little bit over a year ago, and at that stage she already knew that she was terminal. She knew it was just a matter of time until she died, but she was absolutely willing to come on the podcast and share her thoughts and her reflections with us. You won't hear any kind of self-pity in her voice. You won't hear her being self-absorbed. She was there for the animals till the very, very end. It is my hope that as I face my own battle with cancer, that I have even a small proportion of the grace and dignity and dedication that Helen had. She was true and strong and believed in what she thought was important till the very, very end. So this is a very special episode for me, both professionally and personally. I hope you enjoy listening to Helen and thinking about her life. And from everyone here at Knowing Animals, it's Valet Helen. We will remember you, and we're very grateful for everything you did for animals. Enjoy this episode. This is another iRaw podcast. We podcast to make the world a better place for animals.
Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals. Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals.
Hey people, welcome to Knowing Animals. My name's Siobhan O'Sullivan and I do like knowing animals. This episode of Knowing Animals is from our Protecting Animals series, where we talk to animal advocates past and present about the work they do for animals. Now, this episode of Knowing Animals is brought to you by ASA. ASA is the Australasian Animal Studies Association. Have you been to the ASA Facebook page? At the ASA Facebook page, we regularly post notifications about upcoming publications, funding opportunities, internship opportunities, postdoctoral opportunities. There's a lot going on at the ASA Facebook page. So if you haven't checked it out, go over and have a look at the ASA Facebook page. That's ASA, the Australasian Animal Studies Association. Now, this episode is also brought to you by Animal Publics. Animal Publics is a fantastic publishing group. It's animal focused. It sits within the University of Sydney Press, and they're dedicated to publishing books with a particular animal focus. They publish academic scholarship. They also publish novels, poetry, a lot of different genres. There's really fabulous animal-related publications on offer already at Animal Publics. And if you're about to write a book on animals, why not think about the University of Sydney Press as the place that you publish your book? Okay, well, let's get down to business. This is another episode that's being recorded during the time of COVID-19, so it's being done online. I'm in isolation, but it also affords me the opportunity to speak to fabulous people who perhaps I don't get to see very often, and it would be more difficult to get to speak to them if I had to set up the meeting face to face. And so this week I'm coming to you from Sydney, Australia, and our guest is coming to you from Melbourne in Australia, and I'm really lucky to be joined by Helen Marston. Now, I've known Helen a very long time, and she'll be well known, I think, to a lot of listeners. So Helen has been working for animals for many, many years. She started off at Animals Australia and for a long time has been the CEO of the Australian Association for Humane Research, otherwise known as AAHR. Helen recently stepped down from that role, so now's a really, really good time to get a update about, or get some reflection from Helen on her time as an animal protection leader in Australia. So welcome to the podcast, Helen.
Thank you, Siobhan.
So, Helen, can you start by telling us why you got involved in animal protection?
Well, animal protection was something that I have wanted to be involved in for many, many years, but I didn't until I think I was around 30, and that was a pretty pivotal time in my life. I've been a vegetarian since about age 11, and I sought out products that were cruelty-free, or at least what I could afford back then. And I didn't really think there was anything else I could do aside from using any opportunities I could, like school presentations, to raise awareness. Now, I knew that there were activists doing some fantastic things for animals, but I was under this belief that the only way to become involved was to break into labs and factory farms and end up in jail. And at such a young age, obviously, I wasn't ready for that. So it was only many years later when a work colleague asked me for a recommendation for vegetarian restaurants that I called up Animal Liberation Victoria to see if they had a list, and they offered to send me a newsletter. So I realised shortly after that there were actually ways that you can help animals without breaking the law. So I volunteered with them for some time, and I loved being able to write letters, to attend demonstrations, and be involved in other campaigns to advocate for animals. But it was something I had to do outside my working hours. I'd been working as a client relationship manager in investment banking, and so the time that I had available was quite limited. I really enjoyed working in that career, but at the end of the day, I found that I was just pushing around papers and helping make rich people richer. So I wasn't really doing anything to make a real difference in the world. So after a bad day in the office, one day I actually said at the Animal Lib office, "Oh, if anyone knows of a job in animal rights, let me know because I'm onto it." And I knew full well at the time that there weren't paid roles in the animal movement, or that wasn't back then. And someone alerted me to a vacancy at ANZFAS, which is now Animals Australia. And obviously I jumped at that opportunity. I was incredibly fortunate that I was offered the job. And at the time it was only part-time and for 6 months. And it was a really difficult decision at the time because I had to weigh up giving up a career, a well-paid career that had a lot of security, or moving to a job that I thought I would love, but it was only 6 months and it was only part-time. So I was in such a dilemma that evening. I went to bed not knowing what to do. And I woke up the next morning thinking, oh, it's clear as crystal, take the job at Animals Australia. And it was the best decision I ever made in my life, and it changed the course of my life. So that's how I actually got involved in a career in animal advocacy.
Fantastic. Well, for a lot of people listening, Animals Australia will be a very familiar organisation, but at the time you started working there, it was a very, very different kind of organisation, much smaller. Can you tell us a little bit about those early years at Animals Australia?
Oh, yes, you're right. It was very, very different to what it is now. It used to be known as ANZFAS, which is the Australian New Zealand Federation for Animal Societies, which was a bit of a mouthful, hence the name change. But there were 4 of us working there at the time, and 3 of us were part-time. And it was very different because obviously veganism was not as mainstream as it is today. The work that we did involving live export, for example, was getting the reports and recording the statistics of animal deaths on the ships each year. And nobody really knew about it because, collecting statistics and the media wasn't picking up on things like that. So it was a very important job. I think the groundwork that Animals Australia did, particularly what Glenys did on committees, was really, really important to the growing of the organisation. But back then it was very, very quiet. Nobody really knew much about ANZFAS. So it was a really good time to get my foot in the door and to start off within the animal advocacy movement.
So Animals Australia, when you were at Animals Australia or at ANZFAS, you would have been exposed to the whole breadth of issues, and, I certainly attended lots of ANZFAS meetings, and, they would have someone who represents companion animal issues and someone on, wildlife issues, etc. But it seems to me that of all the issues that you were exposed to, you developed a particular passion for addressing animal suffering in the field of research and education. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got drawn to that issue?
Oh, definitely. I mean, the fact that there were so many issues going on at ANZFAS at the time was good and bad for me. It was good in that I learnt so much about so many different issues, but it was also bad in that I felt that I was spread so thinly that I didn't really get a really good grasp of any particular issue. But the one that really jumped out at me was animal experimentation, and that was because I felt that there was hardly anybody speaking out about this issue because they found it was a very difficult issue to debate against. It was something that I'd felt strongly about for many, many years. Even when I was in high school, when I learned about product testing on animals, and I remember at the time one of my idols was Linda Stoner with her role on Cop Shop, and then I found out she was an animal advocate and she was advocating against cosmetics testing on animals, and so I idolised Linda Stoner, who ironically is now a wonderful friend of mine. So it was an issue I was aware of for a long time, but then learning more about it, I was just absolutely blown away by the hideous things that people could do to animals for such trivial reasons, and it was acceptable. And there was hardly anyone speaking out about it. So that's why I got interested in that particular area. And one of the first areas that I started working on was xenotransplantation, which is the transplanting of cells, tissue and culture from one animal to another, the end goal being usually from pigs to humans. And I was involved in the NHMRC's consultation, that's the National Health and Medical Research Council, I was on that committee on behalf of Animals Australia, and I learned so much about that particular issue. But that's how I got involved more in animal experimentation issues and where I got most of my background knowledge, just mixing with the researchers and hearing their perspectives, hearing the arguments against why this process shouldn't go ahead. And it was just a huge, huge learning experience for me.
Wonderful. You can learn a lot being on those kinds of committees, even though it's very challenging work. So, fast forward, and AAHR, Australian Association for Humane Research, is looking for a new CEO, a new leader, and you are selected. What was it like going into AAHR? What was that organisation like at that time?
Oh, that was a huge part of my life too. Having worked for Animals Australia and wanting to specialise in one area, clearly I wanted to specialise in animal experimentation. But the founder of AAHR, Elizabeth Alston, learned about the work that I was doing with the NH and MRC, and also that I founded during that time Humane Charities Australia, which was to promote or identify medical and health charities that did not use donations to test on animals. She knew about my work there, and she knew about my work with the NHMRC. And so she contacted me and asked me to visit her in Sydney to talk to her about different issues. So I went along. And after a lot of discussion, she told me that she wanted to hand over the organisation, and she offered me the position of CEO. And I was so taken aback. I just thought, I can't possibly do something like that. The issue was too technical. I'm not experienced. I can't do it. I had so much self-doubt. And I just said, oh, look, I have to think about this. It's just a big thing that you're suggesting to me. And I thought about it for a couple of days. And at the end of the thought process, what I came up with was, somebody is just handing me my dream on a silver platter. How could I possibly say no to that? And so I said yes, and I took it on board. And I don't know if I was the best, I'm sure I wasn't the best person for the job because I knew so little, really. I was worried that, how could I possibly debate a brain surgeon? How could I possibly debate a microbiologist? I don't have all that expertise. But even if I was a brain scientist, I wouldn't have the expertise to debate a microbiologist. Or if I was a microbiologist, I wouldn't have the expertise to argue against, some other expert or cancer researcher. So what I've realised is that nobody is an expert in all these different areas, and yet we still have to speak out against this practice because it was so unjust, and it was so, well, it's not only unjust, it's not just unethical, but it's just so scientifically invalid. And what I've realised is that you don't have to have all the answers to every specific scientific question. What I really needed to know was the basic information is that animals are different to humans in their biology, their anatomy, their metabolism. They are not good models on which to base human medicine. There are better ways of doing it. And by sticking to the most basic of arguments, including, for example, the 9 out of 10 drugs that are successful on animals, which go on to fail in human clinical trials, all of these overarching arguments nullify all that scientific jargon and the details. And we can fight against this issue. And so I networked with as many people as I could. There were really good people speaking out about these issues around the world, and I worked with them, used their information, gathered the resources together, and worked that way.
Sounds like hard work, Helen. I know you've put in a good hard decade and a half and grown the organisation. Can I ask you now to have a think about some of the victories or some of the things that AAHR has achieved during the time that you were at the helm?
It's hard to say it's hard to recall an actual victory because I don't believe that anybody could actually claim victory, or I don't believe any individual or any organisation can claim victory for any particular issue because everything is a combined effort. I mean, we have worked on a lot of things. For example, we tried to stop the the use of pound dogs in some Queensland councils, which we were successful with. But there were other people working on that too, so I'm certainly not claiming that we won that battle. There's the cosmetics testing issue. We worked extensively on that, but I certainly can't claim that Humane Research Australia was the ones that did it. They got it over the line. When I was working on xenotransplantation, we did manage to get a 5-year moratorium on that one. But I think the one victory that I think that we can claim is that we have helped raise awareness. And I know it might be anecdotal, but when I first was involved in the organisation, we would go out to festivals and expos and talk to people, and they would come up to us and argue the issue, saying, yeah, okay, it's cruel to animals, but, we have to do it, otherwise we're not going to get medicines, we're not going to get vaccinations, we're not going to have cures for anything. But these days, if you go to an expo, people come up to us and say, why are we still fighting this? Animals are not the same as humans, it doesn't work. So I feel that we have been part of that victory, that we have changed the mindset. And we've been measuring this every 5 years. Humane Research Australia has commissioned a public opinion poll to look at awareness and to look at people's opinions on animal experimentation. And it has steadily been changing over the past 15 years, where there is a lot more awareness of the issue now and there is a lot more opposition to it.
So for listeners to this episode who are thinking to themselves, I wonder, what are the key issues with animal research? What is it about it that's most problematic or that could be most addressed most quickly, that kind of thing? What do you say? What do you see as the key issues or the key kind of battlegrounds, if you like, with regards to animal research?
I think the most important thing is to continue raising awareness, and not awareness that it happens. A lot of people still don't understand that animals are used in research in Australia, particularly primates, and we do use primates and we breed primates for research. So there's still a lot of awareness that we need to raise, and there's still a lot of convincing that they're not the best methods of research. There's still people out there who say, yeah, but if it's your mother or your child that's dying, you'll allow it. That's not the case, and we need people to understand that using animals is not saving your child. It's probably stalling progress to save children and dying people. So that's what still, that even though we've had a lot of success in that area, I think a lot of growth, there's still a long way to go there. But one of the things I have learned is that researchers are also agreeing with us now, saying, yes, we are acknowledging that animals are not good models, but we don't have the resources to look at the alternatives. So what I think the biggest battle is now is that we need to convince our government bodies that we need to invest more resources, time and money into developing these alternatives or non-animal methods of research. It's happening in other places around the world, and there's very, very little commitment to that in Australia. And researchers want it. We want it. It's going to result in fewer animal suffering, and it's going to result in better medical progress. So I think that's the thing that needs most work.
Yes, I agree with you. I think alternatives really is the way forward. We're not, no one wants to see research stop.
Not at all, no.
So, Helen, do you see kind of real signs of kind of hope or growth? Like, do you hear regularly about a young researcher who's developed a new way of doing something, or a new test, or a new way of using tissue samples, etc.?
There is a lot of work like that happening around the world. One of the main areas is the body-on-a-chip technology, which replicates different areas of the body, and chemicals or treatments can be introduced to this network of organs, and it results in data that is applicable to humans rather than false data from an animal that has a different system to us. That's the type of research that we want to promote. A lot of younger researchers are wanting to get involved in this area, but there's just not enough in Australia to allow them to do that. And another concern is a lot of researchers young researchers might be not turned away, but they might reject the whole medical research industry because they don't want to be involved in animal experimentation. There was a study done some years ago by a student, a member of ours as well, at La Trobe University, looking at the attitudes of young researchers and students about animal experiments, and they want alternatives. They don't want to go down that path of using animals.
Interesting. So when you think about the future for people who are concerned about animal research, the kinds of things that an individual can do to support perhaps, a more positive future for laboratory animals, what are the kinds of things you think of?
I think people need to look at their own specific skill sets and how they can use them to promote the issue. For example, we have a lot of people out there with fantastic analytical minds. It would be great if they could get involved in the legislation and changing the legislation to direct things towards the alternative development. There are people who are great at presentation skills, so it would be great if they're out there telling people and educating people that animal experiments are not the way to go. I think, and using their networks, but even on a more layman's approach, little things like if you're going to make a donation to your favourite health charity, make sure it's one that's on the humane charities list, and don't give money to, for researching cancer, knowing that money is going to be used on experimenting on animals. And then there's the obvious things like, not purchasing beauty products that have been tested on animals. So there are a lot of things that can be done, but one of the most important is just getting the discussion out there, raising awareness, because nothing's going to change unless people are aware of these problems.
Yeah, I heard you quite a bit on the media, Helen, a few months ago when some non-human primates were inadvertently kind of set free or released or got away from their handler at a outside a hospital in Sydney. And as you say, a lot of people in the media were very surprised that we even have non-human primates that we're using in research.
Yeah, absolutely. People are still shocked when they hear that. A lot of people don't even realise that animal experiments occur here, but when we tell them the primates, they just look at us as if, it may be overseas or maybe many years ago, but not here in Australia. And we tell them, yes, here in Australia, and we have 3 breeding facilities where baboons and marmosets and macaques are bred specifically for research purposes. So that does surprise people. And then when we talk about the types of research these primates are subjected to, that's even more alarming, because when you think of primate experiments, you think of, brains being cut and electrodes going into them. And that's exactly what happens. And we have research papers to show that in Monash University and Melbourne University, that's exactly what they're doing. And we try to raise more awareness. Well, Humane Research Australia tries to raise more awareness of this by publishing our case studies, where they look up research papers in published journals, break it down into layman's terms so people can see exactly what is happening to these animals. And these are the things that we're finding occur with primates in Australia, is that they are subjected to incredibly invasive research.
Well, that's not a very positive note to end this part of the discussion on. But Helen, I ask everyone who comes on the podcast to answer 5 quick questions. Are you ready for your 5 quick questions?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. Now, you might have already said a little bit about this, but you might have more to add. Can you recall when you first started to think there was something wrong or problematic about the human-non-human animal relationship?
Absolutely. I remember the exact moment, which was a long time before I got involved in the animal movement. I'm not sure what age I was at the time, but I do know I was very, very young, and I questioned my parents about my favourite meal. Now, don't cringe when I tell you this, but my favourite meal when I was a little child was heart and chips. And I wanted to know, I was curious, why these little meaty things with my chips were called hearts, because I knew that a heart was inside your body. And I was really fortunate that my parents were very honest with me, and they told me the truth, that they were actually little hearts from lambs. And I was really dumbfounded. I thought, well, okay, well, if they're hearts, what are my chops and the sausages and all these other things that I eat? And I learned what meat was, and without knowing how they were raised or they were slaughtered, I figured if I was going to eat them, then they had to be dead. And I thought, how can that be okay? Why would this animal have to die so I can eat them? Now, I didn't particularly love animals. I was never the one in the family who brought home lost dogs or injured birds. It was more of a sense of injustice. And so I thought, no, why should they die so I can eat them? And no one else seemed to share that concern. So for so many years, I just thought, well, I'm just a very sensitive person over these things. But the real revelation came for me when I was in a bookstore and I saw a book that was titled Animal Liberation by Peter Singer. Now, I know a lot of people say that book changed them, and it did for me too, but in a very, very different way. It wasn't reading that book that changed me. It was just seeing that book on a bookshelf. The words animal liberation just jumped out at me, and I thought, yeah, that's what I've been trying to articulate to people for so long. Animal liberation. There weren't words that were common back then, but they meant so much to me, and just everything in my head made sense. And I thought, yeah, I was right. I was onto something here. And the fact that this book was written by an ethicist, I felt really reassured that I wasn't just super sensitive or anything. I actually had a valid point. And I bought the book, obviously, and I read it, but I've got to say that a lot of it went over my head at the time. But it just, as horrific as the book was, it just consoled me that, yeah, I wasn't silly or soft. I was right. It's wrong. Animal use in that regard is wrong. And that was my first realisation, I guess, about the problems in the relationship between humans and animals.
Wonderful. Yes, it was certainly, a different time, pre-internet. I think feelings of isolation when you're interested in animal issues and perhaps thinking about becoming vegan, it was tricky, wasn't it, pre-internet? It was, and big organisations that everyone knows the name of.
Oh, yeah, totally different. I mean, obviously never heard of the group Animal Liberation. There was no internet. There wasn't even, well, it was just a different world. And so and everybody around me, I didn't even know another vegetarian, let alone a vegan. I mean, I wasn't vegan back then, obviously. I innocently thought that not eating them was enough, not knowing the horrors of the dairy industry and the egg industry or animal experimentation and other issues. But, yeah, it was, I guess, kind of isolating, thinking that I'm not normal. Normal people eat meat and normal people do all these things, and I didn't want to do that. I just felt it was wrong.
Well, you found your tribe. That's the main thing.
Eventually, yeah.
So, Helen, can you recall the first thing you did to try and bring about change for animals?
Yeah, that was, I think it was before I was involved with Animal Liberation. Obviously I was not eating them and I was seeking out cruelty-free products. But the first real issue that I worked on was to ban animal circuses from our local council. And I really geared up thinking this is going to, I'm really going to work on this. I drafted petitions and letters to newspapers, and I was ready to go in and fight hard. And I wrote to the council. And then I was invited to the council meeting, and there was a bit of debate amongst the councillors, and they put it to the vote, and it got through. And I was sitting in the back of the hall thinking, well, is that it? We did it. I was a bit taken aback that, well, what about the petitions that I was going to do and the letters to the end? All these things, it would just happen. And, it made me realise, wow, if you follow the right processes, you can actually achieve something. Now, obviously it wasn't a fantastic win because they still allowed domestic animals in circuses. It was only wild animals they banned. And those wild animal circuses were still allowed on private land. But the fact that we set out to achieve something and we achieved that with the council by following the right process was just a wonderful first start for me, I guess. Things haven't been so easy ever since, but it was a good start.
So if you had to name one animal advocate who's had a big impact on you, who would it be?
Oh, without a doubt, it would have to be Glenys Oogjes, the CEO of Animals Australia. I remember when I was working volunteering at Animal Liberation, we were downstairs from the ANSFAS office, And there were a couple of women who work up there quietly in the office, and they'd come downstairs to go out for lunch and go back up. And I just think, what on earth do these women do up there? You know, I don't see them leafleting or protesting. What can they be doing? Just sipping their coffee, being animal people. But when I finally learned what they did, I was just amazed, particularly Glenys. She's just always been so knowledgeable, so committed and passionate, but she's never been in the spotlight, so I've always seen her as the quiet achiever. And I learned so much from her about her professionalism, her diplomacy, and to pull through difficult situations. And even today, I go to her as I consider her my mentor. Any problem I have with work-related issues or animal-related issues, I go to Glenys. And aside from, you know, thinking she's amazing, I'm just eternally grateful to her for giving me the opportunity to gain employment within the animal advocacy movement.
Wonderful. Well, good on you, Glenys. So, Helen, what's the most important thing animal advocates can do for animals?
Well, aside from, as I said earlier, using their skills, the skill sets that they have to the best advantage, I think the most important thing is for them to maintain unity. I know that there are differing views on how to achieve the same end outcome within animal advocacy, whether it's, you know, in-your-face protesting or whether it's quietly, you know, serving vegan foods as a softer approach. And I know that these differing opinions can cause a lot of conflict within the movement, but I'm not aware of which methods are more effective. I don't know if anyone is aware of what methods are more effective than others to actually advocate for these animals. Maybe you do, Siobhan, in your line of work, you probably would have a much better idea than me, but I don't know which works and what doesn't work. So I believe we should respectfully advocate in our own way without demonising others for their ideas. And I think we need to choose our battles and not waste our efforts on fighting the wrong people. We're all on the same team. We have to appreciate our differences and our different approaches, and focus on the end outcome.
Yeah, I agree. Look, my view is that social change is complicated, it's multifaceted, and I don't think there is one route to achieving positive outcomes on any social issue. So I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah. I mean, I think the main a perfect example would be there are activists who go out there and are really in your face, showing videos and breaking into farms. And then there are others who are referred to as cupcake vegans because they make lovely vegan food. Now, I think that both of those roles are extremely important. You know, I think they're both, like you said, the different facets are needed. And I think if it wasn't for these people putting videos in your face who people think, oh, they're extremists, you know, get them out of the way, I'm not listening to them, it's still important that they get the message out there. And it's also important for the people who cook vegan foods to show how amazing this lifestyle can be. So there shouldn't be any, you know, disruption between the two. They should work in harmony together because we all have the same end outcome that we want, and that is a better world for animals.
I've not heard that expression, cupcake vegan, but I love it. I'm going to start using it.
I think it's horrible, but because I think the cupcake vegans are a really, really good job.
Oh, well, we couldn't survive without the cupcake vegans. Goodness me. Helen, if you had the power to change one thing about the human-non-human animal relationship, what would it be?
That animals could be seen for who they are and not what they are. I think they are all individuals with an interest in living. They might not have the same cognitive abilities as complex as ours, but then again, we can't communicate underwater with sonic waves like whales and dolphins, and we can't see ultraviolet lights like chickens. And we don't have the intensely powerful sense of smell like dogs do. So every species is unique and has their own unique talents, and we are no better than them. I think we need to respect and appreciate those differences. So almost everyone I know regards themselves as animal lovers. What they should be is animal respecters. I think it's far more important to respect animals than to love them.
Interesting. Well, thank you, Helen. So what are you working on next? You've just stepped down as CEO, and what are you where to from here?
I'm certainly not ever going to walk away from animal advocacy, that's for sure, and particularly animal experimentation. It's something that's always going to be a huge part of my heart. So I'm not walking away from it. I will be working in the background. I have my little venture at the moment called Morocco Candles, which are pouring beautifully scented soy candles, vegan and cruelty-free. And I do that for two reasons. Number one is that I love making them. It's just so peaceful and a beautiful thing to do. But also it's a vehicle for me to reach a different audience, to promote kindness and compassion to animals. And hopefully I can use that different audience, the more diverse audience, to raise more awareness of the injustices towards animals and sort of bring them into the fold, perhaps. So still working on the issue, but in a gentler way.
Wow. And I didn't realise about your candle business, Helen. How can people find out more about it?
Okay, it's on Facebook and Instagram, and it's called Morocco Candles, Maroco Candles. And I do obviously make candles and sell them to sort of pay for itself, but in between the candle making, I try to put out messages of compassion and inspiration and hope and that kind of thing.
Wonderful. Well, check out Morocco Candles on Facebook and Instagram. And also, I guess you'd encourage people to also check out AAHR?
Oh, most definitely. It was called Humane Research Australia now. So
beg your pardon.
Yeah, so it's humaneresearch.org.au is the website, and definitely worth checking them out and giving them your support, because even though I mightn't be there anymore, they're a wonderful organisation, some terrific people doing some great things that are very, very passionate about animals and ending animal experimentation.
Wonderful. Well, Helen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Siobhan.
Thanks, Helen, and thank you to the listeners for joining us for Knowing Animals, the podcast where we speak to animal studies scholars and animal advocates about the work they do for animals. Now, you can also follow us online. We're at Instagram at Knowing Animals, Facebook at Knowing Animals, and don't forget to leave a review. Reviews make it easier for other people to find us. I'm Siobhan O'Sullivan, and I do like knowing animals. For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.